Welcome to The Father's Heart with Tom Clark, better known as Papa Tom.
Good morning. This is Papa Tom at the Father's Heart Talk Show. I'm here with a special guest, Dr. Adam Carrington, Associate Professor of Politics from Hillsdale College. We're going to talk about an interesting subject because on the Father's Heart Talk Show, we're always going to bring up ways in which people can overcome fear in their lives. Our mission statement is to bring the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest they smite the land with a curse. The curse is fatherlessness. We've been very blessed in our country to have founding fathers that gave us the ability to overcome tyranny and overcome fear. And that history, which is very rich in our Constitution and in other aspects of our history, has been designed to protect the people from tyranny and help them overcome fear. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce you, the audience, to Dr. Carrington, and he's going to share with us a little bit of background on himself and about Hillsdale College.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me on. And yes, I am an associate professor at Hillsdale College. We're a small liberal arts school in Michigan, for those who may not be familiar with us. And what does that mean that we're a liberal arts school? It means that we are dedicated to cultivating and educating the entire person, not just for a job, not just their minds, but their souls, and not just for work, but to be a human being and a citizen, and even more than that, a child of God. We were founded by Free Will Baptists in the 19th century, and while we're not affiliated with any particular Christian denomination, we are very much dedicated to faith and have a very vibrant set of different Christian groups and many believers on campus, and believe therefore that part of cultivating the soul too is to ask the questions about God and our relationship to God, and to bring that all together in a way that I think hopefully builds up not only our own students, but those across the country, which is also why we have a pretty extensive number of different educational programs that can be accessed by probably many listeners that are listening now. We've had much of our curriculum has been turned into online content as well. And we just hope we can be part of that broader process of helping people learn more what the good, the true, and the beautiful is.
That's very good. You know, I'm a supporter of Hillsdale College. And one of the reasons why I'm a supporter is because I realize that you're one of the few colleges in the country that doesn't receive money from the federal government. Therefore, you're not on the hook to say what they want you to say. You're free from that.
Yep, that is true. And that also means we're even more dependent on supporters, friends of the college. And we really like to say friends of the college because we see it as a partnership, that we're all doing our part to try to make our country and our world better.
Mm-hmm.
And that in particular, what we're so thankful for is the generosity of many across the country has made it so that even as expensive as college is across the country, we're really able to give opportunities to students to come to a college of the pedigree that I think we've become that might not be able to afford it otherwise, and to really make it so that those with the best merit really can come and get the education here and then go out, as many of them already are, as alum, and try to further again make their neighborhoods, their states, their countries, their communities better places.
You know, before I got into media, I was in the financial services industry. And we'd always do planning for people's lives, financial planning. And one of the plans that grandparents always had for their grandchildren was to provide for their grandchildren's education. And I always thought that that was a very good thing and a very blessed thing that they would accumulate capital, you know, for purposes of funding their education. As I've gotten older, and I realize many of the universities in America that take funding from the federal government have found themselves delivering a woke agenda, an agenda that is, in my personal reflection, crazy, and it's anti-God, and it's anti-biblical, and it provokes much fear, but it also is not based upon the truth. And so I wouldn't, early in my life, I'd want my kids to go to Ivy League schools. But today, I wouldn't want them to go to an Ivy League school. I wouldn't want them to go to most of the universities in America. And in fact, as a grandfather, I wouldn't pay for it if they went to those colleges and universities. But I would absolutely pay for them to go to Hillsdale College. So I'll give you a testament of what that value it is to me personally. And I have 15 grandchildren, so maybe I'll make a little dent.
I would love to have some of them in class going forward. We are very blessed in the students. I'll actually say, I was saying this to a prospective student and his father that I was meeting with this morning. The students are some of the best part of this place because they really do give us so much hope that, as bad as the news sometimes seems out there, there are really fine young men and women who love God, love their country, love their communities, and genuinely are wanting to make their lives about furthering all of those things, and doing so hopefully that we're equipping them to be able to do that in the best way possible. So again, that is deeply appreciated, and you're right, we do have a kind of independence by not having government money,
Mhm.
and we've really cherished that, and we really believe that that allows us to teach in a good way, and not in a way that's merely responding to, as you said, some of the woke and other thing ideologies. We're very much about teaching young men and women self-government,
Mhm.
meaning they don't only get what we think is the true, the good, and the beautiful, although we try to show them those truths, whether it be from Aristotle, the Bible, Shakespeare, but also to encourage them that, to think for themselves so that they can be not just mimicking what we say, but also discern what is good and just and true. And again, it's an investment. And as you said, many of past generations are investing, and they're choosing to invest with us, which we really think is bearing fruit that's for the good of the country and the world.
I had a Jesuit education myself, and the Jesuits were known as very good educators. And one of their principles, which I think sadly they violated, was the principle that you don't teach a student what to think, you teach the student how to think. And like I said, I think they violated that in recent years, but on the origins of it, it makes for true good education. It's the teaching the process of how to think. And therefore, logic becomes a very good, very important part of what that curriculum may be. That being said, I am personally curious as you bring this up, what type of student is attracted to going to Hillsdale these days? You're 18 years old, you graduate from high school. What draws a student? What is the psychographic profile of a student that wants to go there? Can you share that with our audience?
Absolutely. And the way we pitch to students and parents and grandparents is a bit different than I've seen at many other schools. Other schools may pitch that they have great facilities, and our facilities are fine, or great food. Our cafeteria is, fine, not but not the greatest in the world either. It's perfectly adequate. Or other sort of trappings, sports teams, things like that. And we don't. And so we pitch to them sort of two related things. One, I know our president will often say to students, to prospective students, "Oh, you don't want to come here. You don't want to come here at all," which you think might be crazy to do in recruiting. But then he goes on to say, because it's hard. You'll work harder than you've ever thought you would. You'll get lower grades than you ever thought you could,
Mm.
and you'll spend sleepless nights, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, but then he stops and he says, "But if you do come, your life will be changed, and it'll be changed because what you will learn is not, as I was saying earlier, merely about getting a job or a career. You will learn something about what it means to be human in the best of ways. You will learn what it means to be in a community and have friends in the deepest and most thoughtful of ways. and you will learn better how to be a human being and a citizen. And it will be all for the better. And what that does is that attracts a student who is hardworking, who wants to be challenged, but who also has a view of education that isn't about checking a box, getting something on the resume, getting merely a job, although our students do well with jobs. It's really this idea of we're going to cultivate, I want to learn the great things of God's creation and of the world and of our country. And this is the place where I think you can do it better maybe than anywhere else.
Growing up, I was on the other side of that. And I went to an all-boys Catholic school in Long Island called Chaminade, and I got a scholarship to go to Georgetown University. My purposes was to get out, get into the business world, and become a multimillionaire. That was my desire in my heart. And that was my orientation. I did not hold in high regard teachers because they were lowly paid in my mind. That's when I was younger. The older I become, the more value teachers came in my life. I kind of realized the value of teachers is so much greater than anything that I had previously ever thought. And it fits into my understanding of the heart of God the Father. In the heart of God the Father, when he wants to build his heart into men so that men grow up to be fathers, they want to protect, they want to provide, and they want to mentor the next generation. And that mentoring comes the teaching aspect, because we owe it to the next generation to teach them. And we owe it to the next generation to teach my children, teach my grandchildren, and then in the community to teach the children and the grandchildren in that community what it's like about being human, as you said, what about life. We need to cut back in a few minutes, or actually a minute. But do you have one more thought that you can share with us quickly?
No, I would say that I agree, and that we really that really does sum up the mission that we have here. And part of it is a kind of gratitude. We're thankful for our teachers, we're thankful for our ancestors, we're thankful for the American founders, and really trying to distill that legacy going forward, since self-government really depends upon the virtue and intelligence of every generation. We're trying to do our part to extend that to our posterity.
Being thankful is the predicate to getting the blessing of God in your life. And we'll be back in a moment with Dr. Adam Carrington. We're back with Dr. Adam Carrington, and we discussed the background of the students that attend Hillsdale College and its mission statement, and the type of things that they are teaching the students to get more involved with understanding. It's a liberal arts college, and their own humanness, and becoming really better human beings with a greater understanding of that, and also helping them. I didn't actually mention this, but the thought crossed my mind. Human beings need to relate to one another. And when you have a better understanding of what it's being like to be human, it's easier for you to relate to other people in your family, in your community, and value human relationships. In human relationships, in order to have those relationships, you have to have love being exchanged between people. You can't have good human relationships when fear is present. Fear separates. Fear disconnects. Love connects. And love is a primary principle. And you can't have true love exchange between people if that relationship is not based upon truth. So we're going to discuss an element here in the political system that has been part of our system by our founding fathers and our leaders in our country, that was put into the system, the election process, to preserve our freedom in the election process. And it's called the secret ballot. It's a principle that's not directly in the Constitution. Actually, Dr. Carrington's going to reveal to us the history of it, which is one of the reasons I want him on the program. But the purpose behind it is to overcome fear, because it's always in the heart of God the Father that we overcome fear. He says it multiple times in Scripture. Fear not, fear not, fear not. And yet evil is the antithesis of that. Evil wants us to be afraid. Evil wants us to stop relating. Evil wants us to stop doing things, like voting, for example. It's just one aspect of thousands of aspects but it's an important principle in 2024, because 2024 is an election year. And we need to understand what the truth is about what's behind the voting process and the history behind the secret ballot and why it exists, so that we can overcome tyranny that is trying to take our freedom away from us in this particular year. With that in mind, Adam, could you share with our audience the background of your understanding of how the secret ballot came into play?
Yes, and I think a thing to begin with the Constitution is that it leaves a lot of decision making to the states on how to conduct their elections. There's certainly election dates for federal elections. There's baseline rules that Congress put in place, but most of the decision making is still ultimately made state to state.
Mm-hmm.
And early on, there was a pretty wide divergence on how people voted. Voting often came, especially in more rural areas, but even urban, as a sort of festival. They would have a big festival, a big party. You'd have music and parades for different candidates and food and drink. And I should note, not always temperance approved kind of drinks in certain places. People would still be debating and arguing right up until when they voted, right? And even early on, you had even voice voting in some communities. You had ballots that were being cast in sort of open containers that people could see,
Mm-hmm.
and not how we understand voting right now. And in fact, the government at first didn't provide ballots.
Mm.
People would bring their own, like tear off a piece of newspaper, write down who you're voting for. Parties would provide ballots, but they would be ballots that didn't even list the names of the opposing candidates, and you could just drop it in.
Mm-hmm.
So, that system is obviously very different. And if you don't mind, I might just say a little bit of why that system was the case early on, since it's very different from what we understand now.
I'm very
Uh,
interested, actually.
yeah, and I will get to why I think ultimately the way we do it now protects some of the intentions of the founding even better than those early procedures. Sometimes
Mm.
even principles of the founding take some time to get worked out
Sure.
in practice. But the idea there was, if you did a secret vote, some people would accuse you of being ashamed of your vote, that you were doing it just for narrow self-interest, that you were not being engaged for the good of the community, and that if you were engaged for the good of the community and how you're voting, you would do it outwardly and openly. Um, it also was the idea that by voting a little more publicly, there was a sense of belonging. We're a community doing this together.
Mm.
There was an energy to voting. Voting right now is a very kind of solemn thing, and it's a very private and almost like dropping something off at the post office. It was a party at that point. And in a day when there was a lot of illiteracy, it was also a way that people could vote who couldn't read. And I know there's
Mm.
some struggles with making that work even today, even though literacy is much higher. Um, at the same time, though, that you can guess the problems that early on set in with this, because the voting wasn't nearly as secret. There could be intimidation, threats from employers, threats from neighbors, threats from landlords
Mm.
about vote the way I want or else. There could be fraud. It was much easier to especially buy votes and to check on whether the people you bought, paid money to were voting the way you wanted. and even violence. There could be riots and other things at the voting booth. And I don't think I have to tell you or the listeners, none of those are in line with what the founders intended. And all of those were undermining the idea that we are all equal, that we have equal votes, that equality and that equality of voting was due respect as not just people made in the image of God, but as fellow citizens as well, and that should be a respected finality to everyone's vote, even if that vote was different than someone else's. And so that I don't want to go on too long, but down it was a little further down the line that realizing that that way of voting wasn't accomplishing the purposes of the Constitution, that the secret ballot finally came in. And came in, interestingly, from another country. The first country to actually do a secret ballot in the English-speaking world was Australia. And
Hmm.
so when it got introduced to America in the 19th century, they actually called it the Australian ballot.
Really?
And
That's interesting.
originally, and then the name dropped.
Sure.
So that was when they sort of realized, given some of the other histories, and we could get even more into that, that this was necessary to truly protect equality under the law in the way that the founders had intended.
What year did that happen,
A
approximately?
little later than you would think. The first state to do it was Massachusetts in 1888.
Hmm.
And I think a thing to keep in the background here is Reconstruction.
Yes.
During Reconstruction, especially in the American South, the newly freed slaves had been given the vote for the first time.
Hmm.
And you had massive amounts, unfortunately and tragically, of voter suppression, violence at the polls, and the 1876 election was a complete mess because it wasn't clear how much voter fraud and intimidation there had been. It was a matter of how much had that changed the result in states like South Carolina and Louisiana that made the difference in the election. So I think it really took the aftermath of that for states to fully and finally say, hey, this isn't accomplishing what the founders intended in the Constitution. We need to really start to protect people in the process of voting in a more systematic way. So that's ultimately when it came in. And within 4 to 6 years, it was standard that the secret ballot was the way that elections were going to be conducted from then on out.
I saw a movie called The Free State of Jones, and it was a very interesting movie. Some of that background because it was post Civil War, and how the suppression of the vote for blacks not being able to vote after the Civil War was something that was very, um, you know, confrontive, I guess you'd call it the word. But they overcame that. What you bring up to me is that we've had issues with election integrity throughout our history. I think back at Tammany Hall, and buying of votes was part of our history. Sadly, part of our history in some ways, because it was evil seems to gravitate towards power and control. And the voting system, if you can control the voting system one way or the other, will cause people to be afraid. In one way, you can force them to vote the way you want to, or not allow them to vote if you don't want their. If you think you know how they're going to vote, you don't want to allow them to vote. You suppress the vote. You're only going to suppress the vote of those people who you feel are against you, if you're in a position of power. And down through our history, it's shocking to me. I shouldn't say shocking, maybe surprising that we've had election integrity being an issue. Right, not just didn't happen in the 2020 election. It's been 200 years, and
Yeah.
the way our system evolved got stronger and stronger in some ways, but then there were a lot of loopholes or a lot of problems with it, mail-in ballots and other things like that caused other opportunities for fraud, opportunities for the election integrity not to have integrity.
Yes, and I would say it while certainly 2020 was a very strange election, and thankfully because of passing of the reaction to COVID, that's it's almost unrepeatable. It's really hard to repeat that circumstance, and maybe we can get more into this next time with the next segment. But there is the question, as much as things seem to have gotten worse in some things in the history of the country, on elections, the transparency, the safeguards, and the protections are worlds ahead of what they were 50 to 100 years ago. And the ability to have fraud in elections is much, much harder than it has really been at any point in our country's history. Far from perfect, but much, much more so. And I think, again, we can maybe get back to this, how that might, why do we have voting in the first place might be something we could also discuss along those lines.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. Well, that's good to hear that there have been a lot of good things being brought in to our election process, even though there's some negative things against that happened in 2020. So we'll be back in a moment to talk about the good things that were involved in our election process.